Okay, folks, could I just welcome everybody to the Social Development Committee this morning. We're now in open session. And could I just, in terms of housekeeping, just remind members about the protocols around the use of the electronic tablets that members would have. And ask everyone in the room to switch off all electronic devices, telephones and so on. Could I ask any members to declare any interest relevant to today's agenda? And none being declared, then we move on to item number 1, then the apologies. We only have apologies declared from Dolores Kelly, no other to record. Moving on then to the draft minutes of the meeting. These are on page 5 of your pack of the meeting on the 3rd of April. I just want to ask members if they're content for the minutes as presented for accuracy, to agree the minutes for accuracy. Now, just one item to draw. Can you read to my attention?
It's just later on under the exercise.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll read the minutes for accuracy. Thank you. Moving on then to the next item, chairperson business. There is no specific chairperson's business to address this morning. Moving on to matters arising. Just then to say that following today's briefings and the regular business will be conducted an open session that will follow a session to consider the evidence that we have gathered so far in relation to the committee's inquiry. So we'll ask members that we'll deal with that in closed session at the end of this committee session. Okay. Again, or just to deal with the matter which we touched on at our away day in terms of the meetings scheduled for the 22nd of May. Members will remind themselves that there's an election on that day, and some members may wish to be involved in that. Even if you do that, you know, the party probably will want to be involved in it. We had a kind of very brief discussion about that, and could I suggest that we return to this? I mean, I think there's some potential discussion around the Business Committee around dealing with the plenaries that week. Obviously, the plenaries, as I understand, will of course go ahead. So it may be difficult for this committee to convene on the 22nd, but we could consider rescheduling earlier in the week. That's possible. So are members content that we will consider that, but we don't need to formalise that today. We'll wait till we hear what the Business Committee decides about the plenary on that week. Is that members happy enough for that? Mm-hmm. Thank you, members, for that. So that's that dealt with. Okay, so on that basis then, just to advise then, the department has been in touch with the committee. Obviously asked whether the committee wishes to submit a response to the pensions bill, EQIA. The committee was briefed on the consultation at the meeting on the 6th of March. I just want to remind ourselves then that there were 3 responses to that particular consultation. The department has indicated that it is ready to publish the EQIA unless the committee has comment to make on this. There's no members indicated that they want the committee to make a formal response, so our members content to note the matter, and then just obviously the department will go ahead and publish the EQIA, and then people will be free to comment, of course, at that stage. Members happy enough for that? Move on then. Okay, then just next item on matters arising. Just want to make members aware that there was an omission from the minutes of the 20th of March, which were agreed at last week's meeting. The Social Security Miscellaneous Amendments Regulations in Northern Ireland SL1 was agreed at the meeting, but this was omitted from the minutes. And Stephen has just an amended copy or just a change, so it's only really to reflect the fact that that SL1 was agreed at the meeting, but it was omitted from the minutes. Members happy enough then? We just change the minutes accordingly then, and I'll re-sign that. Okay, members, thank you. Again, drawing attention of the members to page 14 of your pack. We've received a letter from Exorna, or a company, I think it is, regarding the ongoing negotiations between the housing executive and plant maintenance contractors, and the letter expresses great concern that agreement has still not been reached on the way forward on the issue, and that this is a very serious concern for the committee. Members are aware the committee has, on a number of occasions, addressed this with the department, and I suppose on the back of this latest piece of correspondence we could do the same thing again. I don't have a formal update as to when those negotiations are likely to be concluded, but members will know that we have been advised repeatedly that they're almost at an end, and hopefully an agreement will be reached. So all we really want to do is to note the letter from Exorna And we can, of course, follow up with the department again, just expressing everybody's ongoing concern to get this matter dealt with as quickly as possible. Members happy enough for that approach?
Yeah, I think the matter is out of hand. We do need to push quite strongly on it.
Okay.
Chairman, we constantly told the department that this was going to be imminent. You know, it's been imminent now for 3 months, 4 months. It's having a knock-on effect on people's ability to have maintenance done to their properties at Barnards. And I think we need to be sending back a message that we're concerned that this is dragging out. I know it may be difficult to tell us, but to try to find out what the hold-up is.
Okay, members contend then we put a very strong worded letter to the department urging this matter dealt with, and just reflecting the comments from both of yourself and Jim and all the other members have expressed these concerns repeatedly. So we'll put that in the strongest possible terms that we can. You happy enough? Okay. If we can move on then, members, to the next item, number 5 on the agenda. This is the financial inclusion, including work with credit unions. That's the departmental briefing. I formally welcome Brian Doherty here from the department and Sinead Crossan. Okay, so Brian, yourself and Sinead, you're happy enough then to take the members through the briefing?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
members have their information in your pack there. Yeah, page 4 of your tabled items folder. Okay, Brian.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Firstly, thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to attend the committee this morning. I'm here to brief you on the work of the department and what we've been taking forward to improve the financial capability benefit payments. And indeed, as Chairman's already mentioned, I'm joined this morning by my colleague Sinead Crossan, who heads up our welfare policy team. The issue of financial capability is becoming ever more important, with increasing pressure being put on household finances across Northern Ireland. It is therefore important that government does what it can to help people improve how they manage their personal finances. This has been recognised by the Executive with the Programme for Government commitment to develop a financial capability strategy for Northern Ireland. And I'm pleased to inform the committee that the Department has played an active role in the development of this strategy, which has been taken forward by the Department for Enterprise, Trade and Investment. While financial capability is about sound financial management and planning for the future, there is no doubt that people living on low incomes are more likely to struggle with taking the necessary steps to plan ahead by, for example, saving regularly. This is too often an unfortunate consequence of their personal circumstances. It is therefore highly likely that many of the people in our society that are less able to demonstrate these positive financial behaviours will be customers of the Social Security Agency that are dependent on welfare benefits. I believe that the Department is well placed to help address the cause of our customers' financial problems, which are often due to a lack of understanding of available products and poor money management skills. We are therefore keen to consider what actions we can take that may have a positive impact on helping benefit customers to improve their financial capability. At an operational level, this means the Department taking steps to ensure the delivery of support where it will be of most benefit to our customers. To facilitate this, it is planned to introduce a new financial support service. This service will be provided to customers presenting to the Social Security Agency for urgent financial assistance from the Social Fund. We now aim to provide a holistic service that not only considers the immediate financial need, but will attempt to identify any underlying issues that have contributed to the situation. Customers will then be directed to appropriate advice services provided by third sector organisations and other appropriate partner organisations. The Department has also taken forward work on longer-term actions that it is hoped will make an important contribution to improving the financial capability of our customers. This includes engagement with local credit unions to consider if we can provide assistance to modernise their operations and services. As the Assembly recently acknowledged, the credit union movement plays a very valuable role across our communities. Their focus on encouraging, saving and providing low-cost credit to consumers undoubtedly contributes to strengthening our communities and is what the Department is keen to support. In particular, we want to maximise access to their financial products for people on low incomes. As the committee will be aware, Minister McCausland has expressed his personal commitment to identifying and exploring possible options for dealing with the problem of high-cost credit. There are very clear benefits to be gained from a solution to this issue that particularly affects the most vulnerable in our society. It is anticipated that this will be a significant area of work and a solution is unlikely to be quickly achievable. Nonetheless, the Department is committed to taking this forward and are at the initial stages of investigating how best to proceed. Hope members found that briefing useful, and along with Sinead, we're happy to take any questions.
Okay, Brian, can I just ask just one or two points before bringing other members? What steps will be taken to advise claimants of this particular initiative?
Well, the financial support service is going to be piloted from the 19th of May onward. It's in 3 particular offices in Strabane and Omagh and Falls Road. And we're going to test sort of different delivery models. And as individual customers come into our offices, we're going to advise them of this particular service. And as they're sitting in front of our social fund officers, as they are now, we've developed diagnostic questions, which are in addition to what we would do for the application. And that will sort of start to inform them of the additional service that we have. We're not going out in any sort of big-scale marketing at this stage because we want to treat this within a controlled environment to allow us to do the right sort of evaluation. So we're going to test how we can deliver it on the phone in one instance. We're also going to test about providing additional support for trying to improve benefit uptake through our outreach service and through our local.
Okay, Brian, thank you. Mickey Brady.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. And I suppose any initiative to help people is welcome, but you know, when you look at the amount of benefit a person gets, what, 72.40, and income-based job seekers, you need to be a financial wizard. And if you could survive on it, then you should be writing books in economics, apart from anything else. Because, in a sense, you're defending the indefensible, because the other issue, of course, is that benefit has now been pegged at 1% for the next 3 years. You have in Britain welfare reform, which has taken money off people. And you talk about people here, 56% being more, I suppose, worried about their financial situation than 46%, I think, in Britain. The prices here, fuel, everything's dear here. Utilities are dear, so that's understandable in that sense. But it might help if benefit was actually raised to a livable level, and people wouldn't have the same problem, because years ago they had the old special welfare officer who went round sort of shopping for people and looked after what they considered the most vulnerable cases. And this just seems maybe, in a sense, a step up. Will it be tied in with any benefit uptake in terms of the amount of pension credit, for instance, that's unclaimed every week, about 1.9 million?
Yeah, I would actually agree that those who are on benefits probably are quite astute in terms of managing their finances, and this particular pilot is not so much about testing people's financial capability, but making sure they're very much aware of other services and support that they could well be entitled to. There may well be some individuals who, for instance, are repeat claimants for a social fund loan or a grant, and in those circumstances, we just want to test are they carrying other debts, and there's other types of support. So financial capability is very much about the financial capability strategy that DETI has taken forward. With regard to benefit uptake, one of the services that we will be offering as part of this particular pilot is to get people to agree to having a benefit uptake assessment undertaken, whether that is through our own Make the Call campaign, which you're very aware of, or whether it actually happens there at the particular time. And again, that's sort of part of the process. We want to test at what juncture the intervention should take place.
I know in my own constituency, the credit union in Newry particularly has been a lifesaver for many people and continues to be, and they are quite advanced in terms of like a banking system now. Difficulty is with any credit union, as any financial institution, money is not immediately accessible. So, for instance, for people who are in a situation where they don't have any benefit coming in for 2 or 3 weeks, then you're reverting to crisis loans and you're then having to pay that back. There needs to be a better system maybe put in place to actually allow people to access benefits a lot quicker. Because obviously the credit unions are very much part of the community. Certainly in my own community that's very much the case. But I'm not sure how you can advise somebody in 72.40 to run a household. Okay, you get housing benefit, but to clothe yourself, feed yourself and pay for electricity and heating, you know, it's impossible.
Yeah.
maybe.
Could just with regard to getting benefits quickly, I would have to say our performance within the agency has been particularly strong in terms of the clearance times that we have and getting people on to benefit. And again, I suppose I would agree that people who are on benefits are probably, from a financial management point of view, are quite astute. But this particular pilot that we're taking forward is very much about ensuring that people are signposted and can access other services that they may not necessarily go to or to make them aware of. And that could range from anything that our third sector partners can do, such as Citizens Advice, who are part of the pilot. It may well be social services. It may well be something else in health. It could actually be something in education. So it's not just necessarily about the finance in itself. And we've been doing some work with the credit unions. Officials have met with the Irish League of Credit Unions and the Ulster Federation of Credit Unions, who are very keen to work with us in terms of offering maybe extended banking products, very early stages, and something to be developed. And in tandem with that, we're also looking at affordable credit. And what that may mean. I should point out we're not sort of quite sure ourselves, but I think there's plenty of media around Northern Ireland and elsewhere in the UK with regard to payday lenders, the Wongas of this world, which in themselves actually aren't necessarily the big issue. Believe it or not, credit cards, store cards, overdrafts can actually be more difficult for people in terms of finding themselves in debt than payday loans.
Maybe the department should consider taking Harry Potter in as a financial advisor.
All right, so Fra?
Sure. The follow on, I've never seen Harry Potter, so I'll live at the Maggie.
He's a wizard.
You're a wizard too, Maggie.
Keep going, Fra.
No, but just to follow on for it, when I raised this at the time this was first made at this committee. See, it's beyond me to believe that if a couple's getting £113.70 and they walk in and they're sent to a financial advisor to sit down and advise them how best to spend that. Just can you take me through how that will be done when they have food to pay, they have other household costs to pay that surely may end up much more than the thing. But how would you advise somebody on £113 to be wise with that money?
Well, I think the starting point in the pilot is the fact that the trigger would be that somebody came in and was looking for support from Social Fund, whether it be a loan or a grant. And it's then trying to understand what are the circumstances in which somebody finds themselves that they're having to seek that particular benefit support. It may well be that somebody doesn't have debt, it's in a crisis situation. You're very familiar with how crisis loans work. But if through the diagnostic questionnaire you find that either people have been coming back for repeat crisis loans, or they tell you that, look, I have other debt issues, the diagnostic discussion you will have is around, well, what steps are you taking to try and reduce that debt, and have you thought about other advice? And then using our partner organisations like Citizens Advice to walk them through how they have been managing their own finances and maybe how you could get out of the situation with the debt they're carrying. I'm not suggesting that the sort of advice they will get is how you spend every penny that you have, but just to try and understand what are the challenges for people, and is there support out there, additional support
It's also,
that can be given.
Like what?
it's also as well about making them aware of the benefits of being banked and being able to compare different loans available so that they know
Is this
about
at a cost?
APRs.
Is this at a cost, or who covers the cost of this?
In terms of the actual service that we're going to
You
deliver,
mentioned banking or things like that. Obviously, there's a cost to it.
Of having a bank account.
Yeah.
They'll talk to them as well about bank accounts that are free to access and about banks that charge for being overdrawn. They'll help them to compare bank account products and things like credit union accounts and things like that, so the customer can make the decision of which account will be best for them. There's been research done that by being unbanked, a customer can be, or someone could be charged £250 extra compared to somebody who does have a bank account. So it's things like that. It's helping customers being aware of the different impacts of their decisions.
But if somebody somebody on £113 a week, their only decisions are, especially a couple or a lone parent, their only decision is how they feed themselves, how they clothe themselves, and the thing. So there's nothing anybody can say. Well, they're going to say, well, I think you should cut out a meal one day to be able to put money away. In terms of crisis loans, budget loans, and community care, people only go to that when they're in a crisis, and they go for a specific reason. So how are you going to sit down and say to somebody, Well, when we aim for specific, there's a crisis in your family and there's a certain issue or item, but we think you should handle your money this way. It's totally impossible to do, because as soon as people get the money in their hands, it's away.
Yeah, and we're not suggesting that we will be sending everybody to get sort of financial advice and additional financial advice. I think it's very much down to the individual circumstances of the people that come in front of us and being able to access some element of support that they have not maybe been aware was available to them, or maybe for various reasons they decided not to seek, whether it be through pride or stigma or whatever it may be. But we're by no means suggesting that everybody will need to understand how to manage their money. And I accept the benefit rates, but really that's sort of outside of, dare I say it, our ambit, because they're set for us in terms of over with the coalition government and Treasury. So we have to work within the parameters that we have.
And I know that you have the people that have to implement the thing that's outside your remit, but people between the ages of 18 and 25 get £52 a week. How do you expect to give somebody financial advice on how to handle that? Or if you put them in send them in other directions, what you're actually doing is putting them in debt. And that's a difficulty.
And in many ways, that's why we're running the pilot. I mean, the pilot will allow us to understand and learn, is this a particular service that we need to expand upon, or is there a different type of service that we need? But I think it's fair to say that there is recognition of some element of support is needed for some individuals, and we need to start at some point.
I have to say that the two of the three areas that I've chosen are probably the most socially deprived areas in the north, and that tells you the thing that as soon as people get their money in that area, it's paying out. It's either for food, clothes, or backstreet money lenders.
Okay, Fra, thank you. Michael Copeland.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, guys, for the presentation. 2 points, one about the banking system and the other about under or signposting towards advice. If you send someone who is presented with a problem to a particular advice sector, have you any surety that the advice given will be the same in all the places that they might go to? Because advice is like every other commodity. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, and some of it's just plumb useless. And will there be a set number, in other words, will you refer specific types of inquiries based on an assessment made by your people to specific advice providers? The second one is that having a bank account is a fairly normal thing for most people, unless you happen to be the sort of person or in that socio-economic group that actually needs it. And have you had any discussions with the banking system, and would you agree that there's a degree of immorality when someone is charged £25 for having insufficient funds to progress a £2 direct debit?
Well, with regard to the first point, in terms of signposting, for this pilot we're actually working with Citizens Advice, and there has been training provided on both sides with Citizens Advice themselves and with our own team who are going to deliver this particular service. I think it would be fair to say that everybody who receives advice, it's very much based on your own individual circumstances, and you can't really draw a direct comparison between the three offices or the three localities that we're going to use. But one of the particular services that we're going to signpost you to is Daddy's Debt Advice Line, which is tried and tested, has been, by all accounts, very successful. And the type of advice, my understanding is the type of advice they've been providing has been very useful to those individuals who have received it. But we will be evaluating the advice both in terms of the quantitative number of cases and the qualitative advice that is actually being given to see how that has actually gone. With regard to the banking, it's not really for me to sit and agree or not agree about it.
No, I understand.
£25,
it's just there was something, I'm not sure if it was mainland based or based here in Northern Ireland, about banks having their ability to charge people who are on certain benefits, certain levels of charges. It became very unclear to me what the position was, because it didn't seem to be the same across all of them. But I have a couple of dozen cases, all funny enough with the same branch, where charges of £25 were levied in for £2 direct debit that there were sufficient funds to cover this.
Yeah. Well, you probably are aware there's work ongoing in GB with regard to dealing with banks, and we're obviously very keen and keeping in touch with that to see what the impacts would be to the banking arm here in Northern Ireland. I'm also aware that the Department of Finance and Personnel has met with banks in the past. I'm not too sure exactly what the remit of those full discussions were. But there can be little doubt that, as Sinead's already said, there are differences within the banks in terms of what they do charge, and it is trying to get something fairly common, but something that's affordable for those people who are on low incomes. And there can be quite a divergence between the charges that are levied in some banks against those that are not. But again, this is something we would like to sort of work through with the financial institutions around the type of advice that they also can provide, because in many instances they're also dealing with the same customer base as we have. So I think there's work to be done, which is ongoing, but I would have to say it's at its early stage.
The other thing I wanted to try and, it's difficult to explain this, but I'll do it as best I can. We're dealing with a section of people who are adjudicated as being on low income and having a small amount of money coming in. Is that being expressed against a Northern Ireland demographic or against a UK demographic? Because if they're on low wages in Northern Ireland, they're on low wages or low income. But there are things that actually make being on low income, as Fra alluded to, in Northern Ireland considerably worse, because a substantial proportion of budget are inescapables: food, heat and light. And they are disproportionately expensive here in Northern Ireland. Now, if they're disproportionately expensive for people on middle and upper incomes, it must be doubly or triply disproportionate for those who are essentially on the breadline. And it's how we measure the effect, not the amount of money that is required to be on low income, but the effect of being on low income, because it must be much worse here than it is anywhere else in the UK.
Well, I wouldn't have information to draw the comparison, but I think that as part of this pilot we will actually start to draw out what people are actually spending their money on, and I would agree that it probably is those three items that you've mentioned. So I think it would be maybe at the end of the pilot we'll start to get a better sense of what that is. There's not a similar service that is being run in GB at the moment, so that, again, there's nothing to draw a comparison with, and as you're probably aware, local authorities play a bigger role in terms of a crisis loan type offering that they have. They also have housing. So we do have to work with local authorities and the Department for Work and Pensions, who have links in there around what they're doing and see if there's any learning for us. As I have no doubt they will maybe look to us to see if there's any learning from the approach that we're taking.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Paula?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I wholeheartedly agree with a lot of the points that Fra and Mickey had made to do with income and how we could make that income stretch, but I really am encouraged by the other part of it that you had discussed to do with people coming in for like debt management. I worked at the Business Advice Bureau for many years, and I know from my own office, and we probably all know that from our own constituency office, the amount of people who are in debt. And it could be people who had jobs, who had their car loans, their mortgages, their credit cards, their store cards, all of those things, who then end up unemployed. And there is a way out, and this is giving people the information to say, this is where you go for your debt advice, for your money advice. There is a way out of this debt, and for some people that may be the first time someone has actually sat down and said to them, this is where we're going to point you towards. So we need to look at the positive in this as well, and it can be a positive, and this will afford a much needed lifeline for a lot of people who are out there, who are in debt, who are requiring their crisis loans to pay off their other bills, not their normal their household bills, but all of those other things that they've accrued. So I mean, it definitely is extremely worthwhile if it helps those people and signposts them towards those agencies that can sit down and go, right, how do we reduce your debt? And that's extremely important.
Actually, in terms of the debt customers, there's actually a referral process has been agreed with Debt Action NI, and that we will send the details, after the customer agrees, send the details through to Debt Action NI, and they will contact them within 3 days. And for somebody that's deemed to be an emergency case, they'll contact them within 24 hours. Just to say somebody has a court case coming up in the next few days.
For a lot of people sitting at home with all of those envelopes that they haven't opened, that are stuffed in drawers, this is their opportunity to say, right, would somebody please go through this with me? I am at the end of the line. I don't know where to turn. I don't know where to go. And this could be the very opportunity that for someone to sit down and go, right, let me take that from you. Let me look at that. Let me see how we can reduce your weekly or your monthly income. So that has to be a positive.
And our staff are also going to be trained with some assistance from the Debt Action NI and the Citizens Advice staff on the advice that will be offered when they go to the different organisations. So they'll be able to tell our customers what to expect when they go to one of these organisations, so that they know the kind of assistance will be available. So it will encourage some customers to use the services. As you say, some people maybe don't know the services are there, or maybe a bit disinclined to use the services. So it's to help promote the services that are available that will help people in difficult situations.
Okay, Salman?
Okay. I mean, I wouldn't be as kind of sceptical about all of this as what maybe Fran Mickey have been, because I think that Paul has said that there's a lot of good work, and I can think of lots of cases where people have thought they couldn't get out of the situation they were in, have been able to get out of them. And I know from, probably was one Paul was referring to, the CAB at Rathcoole, which we would have worked with quite a bit. But the only question I have is this: what is different than this from what I understand probably goes on in many of your offices at present? I mean, is this just to give the appearance that we're doing something, or officially putting on paper what is informally happening already? Because I know that a lot of people who would go to your offices and where maybe they've got the benefit checks being done, there's no additional money coming in, but they will be referred to some of these agencies already. So how does this add to what's being done?
Well, there is part of formalising the services already there, but we're also working more closely with the organisations in the local areas. The Generalist Advice Service, which is for people who aren't in debt, they're going to offer a telephony service which hasn't been available before. So if anybody contacts our crisis phone helpline through the telephone, they'll be offered a telephone service rather than face-to-face. So that'll be an immediate conversation with somebody. And also the referral process for debt customers at the minute is just signposting, but this will actually be referral. So there'll be like a warm handoff. So the customer will be contacted by the Debt Action NI advisor who will be able to talk to them straight away about their debt issues. And again, I think Brian's referred to the fact the benefit entitlement check, that the customers will also be offered a benefit entitlement check in the offices if it's deemed that they need this, to see if there's any benefits they should already be accessing.
Well, could I ask just one other question then? If it is to be more formalised, very often people who find themselves in this kind of situation, there's other dysfunctionalities there as well, that maybe they've got into it because they might have mental problems, it could be anything. If you refer people, and if you're going to formalise this, how will you follow up that once, first of all, the customer has actually taken the advice and gone to see whoever you've referred them to, and secondly, how successful that referral has been?
Well, there's been a lot of work done in the terms of the management information and the evaluation information that we'll calculate. So the Advice NI and Citizens Advice are capturing a lot of additional information for us that they weren't previously capturing, so we'll be able to see the outcomes of the number of customers who call into our offices and then use the service. And also we're doing customer surveys to talk to baseline surveys when the customers come in initially, and then follow-up surveys to get the customer's view, both in terms of their financial situation, if they're more confident in their financial situation, and also how they viewed the service, if there's any improvements they think could be made to the service that we're offering, and also the third sector.
And last question, you've got the 3 pilots. What do you reckon the cost of those 3 pilots is going to be?
It's going to be, the actual cost hasn't been worked out in terms of how much it will be, but it's not going to cost the third sector anything at all, and this can be done within their current, I suppose, funding.
But there's going to be additional work for yourselves and training people. I don't know if it means additional staff or other additional work.
And there's no doubt there is something additional in there, but we haven't sort of, because of the nature of the pilot, we haven't gone into it, and maybe in that particular degree, but we know that it is relatively small. And could I just add, I would agree, our staff are excellent actually in terms of signposting people to other things. But maybe just to add to what Sinead has said, this is about trying to give maybe more of a consistent service and a better qualitative service in terms of trying to join up some of the dots. Some staff are very good at it. Some staff are maybe not aware of what the other services are within their own area. Some staff are not aware of what there is across government, and it's something that we actually have to look at. For instance, the debt advice line that DETI provides. But it is about trying to be more supportive and in terms of understanding what individuals' people's needs are. So these additional diagnostic questions will invariably add on some time, so it will. But it is important to have a qualitative and quantitative evaluation of all of this, because if we do plan to roll it out, there will indeed be some additional cost and some additional resources required, not only for ourselves, but it also suggests for delivery partners.
Well, just in relation to one of the points you made there in your answer, Brian, has there been any, if Detty are setting up or have set up and spend quite a lot of money, it's hundreds of thousands of pounds, on the debt advice line, at any stage were they liaising with you to see the kinds of issues that you believe should be addressed, and that how what they're providing might link in with the Social Security Agency? No work being done on that?
No, it has indeed. Actually, the diagnostic questions that are going to be asked by our own frontline staff have been developed with citizens' advice, because what you find is people are actually more inclined to be open with citizens' advice. And I think the very nature of the discussions they have, so we were very conscious of making sure that we weren't replicating or duplicating what is already done, and not only with the Detty service, but also with people like Housing Rights, who would also be dealing with people, especially with high housing costs, or people who unfortunately are looking at potentially losing their house. So there's been a sort of broad-bred family that we've consulted with as we've gone along, to bring people in just to make sure that it's as good as it can be at this stage. But I've no doubt there'll be learning in all of this somewhere along the line that we need to reflect upon, and if we decide to roll out the service, to enhance it in some way.
Okay, so Mickey, you looking back in there again?
Yeah, just I really want to raise what I think is important. Because of the lack of social housing, more and more people are having to rent in the private sector. Now, by government's own admission, benefit is subsistence level. And because of local housing allowance, there are many people increasingly having to pay £20 and £30 to top up their housing benefit out of their Social Security benefit. Now, obviously, you can apply for discretionary housing benefit, but that has a finite period, 13 weeks, and then a further 13 weeks, so you have 26 weeks. So, is that going to be factored in? Because you have people who are getting a very small amount of benefit, subsistence level, as I've said. They're having to pay £20 or £30, sometimes more in cases that I've come across, out of their benefit. How can they possibly be expected to manage any financial situation? And it's happening more and more, because the fact of life is that the private rented sector is not regulated in terms of how much they can charge. You know, and the local housing allowance can vary from area to area. And, you know, the average rent in my constituency for private house is probably £100 to £120 a week. And if you're on benefit, you're going to have great difficulty trying to deal with that.
And I think that's one of the expenses, as was already alluded to by Michael, one of those three items around keeping a roof over your head. But from our perspective, we'll be trying to understand what all of those outgoings are. But can you just say this isn't just about debt management? This is about financial inclusion, which goes beyond just how you manage your own money. In any way, as Sinead's already said, it's issues around banking and how you bank. It's issues around what the consequences are if you find yourself getting into credit agreements which are not necessarily beneficial. And you may well have seen in the media over the last week or so, I think it was a cooker that was being bought in some shop in GB. It was £500. You could go to another shop and pay £7 a week, but end up paying £1,400 for the exact same thing. So it's trying to make sure that people understand what the consequences are when you get yourselves into those sorts of agreements. And if you are in that sort of agreement and you're finding it very difficult to pay, what can be done to give you support to maybe come up with a different repayment schedule, or to get out of it altogether. And that'll all be down to individual circumstances. But still with the into the housing bit around what the private rented sector is, and it is an important sector as a whole, and I do accept that it is one of those costs that people do have to meet. And thankfully discretionary housing payment is available to them, albeit that it is time limited in some way. But again, that's something that we would probably look at with someone's individual circumstances with our partner organisation, because our staff at this stage wouldn't have the expertise, and that's why we're going to people like Citizens Advice who do have an expertise in this particular field.
Yeah, but no solution to that. Unless the private rented sector rents are pegged to an acceptable level. to enable those people to actually survive. Because if you're paying 20 or 30 pounds out of your income-based ESA or whatever, it doesn't matter what advice you get, you're still going to have serious difficulties. Has a knock-on effect all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, there's no other members indicating to speak, so Brian, could I thank yourself and Sinead for briefing the committee this morning? And clearly, I think most people would be very supportive of any effort which can be made to help people to sort of resolve some of the issues that they would have to face up to. And obviously, you've heard members varying degrees of scepticism and all the rest of that. So just wish you well and give it a fair wind. That some people get some benefit out of this, but I would take it that it's a two-way process, because obviously Parliament will also be learning through this process as well.
Just one quick, Brian, when were you coming back with the results?
We would hope to have some early evaluation work done around about September, October time. So, and we've no problem whatsoever coming back to give you a flavour of how that has gone.
I'm just going to come on that, or just to see when we can get some feedback on that. Okay, so thank you very much, Sinead and Brian. Thank you this morning. Okay. Members, moving on then to our next item on the agenda, which is child maintenance reforms. Again, another departmental briefing. The paper you have is on page 17 of your pack. And we have Bernie Rooney, Alan McCleary and David Malcolm here this morning to brief us. So, say the three of you are very welcome this morning.
Thank you.
And we'll just leave it to yourselves in the first instance just to make your presentation, committee, please. Here.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, that's whenever you're ready. Okay, thank you.
Right. Can I just begin by thanking you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for this opportunity to brief you on the Northern Ireland Child Maintenance Reform Programme. I've got responsibility for the policy in relation to child maintenance, but my operational colleagues here are also here. So I have Bernie Rooney to my right, who's the Director of the Northern Ireland Child Maintenance Service. In addition to delivering the statutory maintenance service, the Northern Ireland Child Maintenance Service is responsible for delivering the Child Maintenance Reform Programme. And then to my left I have David Malcolm, who's the Deputy Director of the Child Maintenance Service and the Head of Operations. If I start by looking at the background, child maintenance services in Northern Ireland and Great Britain, they're undergoing a programme of major reform. Research shows that children who receive support from both their parents throughout their childhood tend to enjoy better outcomes in later life. Too many people use the child maintenance service to sort out child maintenance who don't need to. Many parents still use the statutory service because they were compelled to do so in the past or because they think they ought to. However, parents and children both do better where they sort things out for themselves. The government's previous statutory schemes, which by default pushed families down an expensive statutory route, are not good for children, families or for society. Fundamentally, this takes responsibility away from parents and it can lead to hostility. These reforms aim to rebalance child maintenance policy, to support parents to collaborate and to work together. Therefore, the focus has moved to providing a service aimed at helping parents to collaborate. That's why the name was changed from Child Maintenance and Enforcement Division to Child Maintenance Service, in order to better reflect the new policy intent of the organisation. The overarching reform programme puts collaboration between parents in the interests of their children first. Encouraging cooperation between parents will also mean that we can focus on ensuring compliance in the cases where our efforts are most needed. This will also allow us to maximise the amount of maintenance flowing to children. The main thrust of the child maintenance reforms is to ensure that parents are able to access the right support to enable them to collaborate in the interests of their children. Now, I'll now pass you on to Bernie, who's the Director, who will provide a bit more specific detail as to how the Department is progressing that to date.
Thank you, Anne. Good morning, Chairman and members. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to provide a further update on the developments in the Child Maintenance Reform Programme. We in Child Maintenance Service will continue to support these reforms by ensuring that information is readily available to help parents reach decisions that will deliver the best outcomes for their children. We do recognise that there will be varying levels of support required for different families, ranging from those who simply require signposting services or information available on the internet, to the more vulnerable who will require a more intensive level of support. It is essential that a range of mechanisms are developed to support separated families, and this is what we are striving to achieve through these reforms. In January 2011, you will recall the Child Maintenance Choices Service was launched. This service provides parents with information and support and signposts them to additional support services in areas such as legal service, mediation, parenting and finance. The information and support provided by the Child Maintenance Choices Service encourages parents to consider putting in place family-based arrangements. And this helps to ensure that an arrangement through the statutory service is only used as the last resort. The Choices Service is free advice and information, and the service has proved to be very effective, with around 10,000 calls received in the last year. Since July last year, we have also been involved in an initiative with colleagues in the Social Security Agency. The purpose of this initiative is to identify lone parents who might not have child maintenance arrangements and to provide further information to them on our Choices service, on our services available to them. The Sorting Out Separation web app was launched in November 2012 and again provides separated and separating families with diagnosis, information and signposting to relevant support services. This app is available on the NI Direct website and indeed has been adopted by many of our stakeholders who also provide this information tool. Child Maintenance Service is currently considering how we can work with other existing services that support separated and separating parents. For example, our colleagues in DHS SPS, Department of Justice, lawyers, Advice NI and Citizens Advice Bureau. We aim to deliver joined-up, targeted services at an early stage that can make life-changing differences to individuals and families. For parents who cannot reach a private agreement on their own, Child Maintenance Service has introduced a new, simpler, more efficient statutory scheme known as the 2012 scheme. The new 2012 scheme will provide an effective and efficient backstop when parents cannot collaborate. The purpose of the new 2012 scheme is to more effectively administer the child maintenance arrangements when parents cannot come to their own family-based arrangement. The 2012 scheme delivers two critical changes. Firstly, material changes to the policy and regulations which simplify the approach to the child maintenance calculations. And secondly, a new IT system has been introduced to administer the 2012 scheme. This new IT system provides the platform to provide a better service than our previous IT systems, which will be decommissioned. In summary, the new 2012 scheme delivers the following benefits: a much simpler and transparent scheme which allows a greater focus on enforcement as and when necessary, a reduction in time and effort to set up and arrange a child maintenance case, as income data is gathered directly from HMRC records. This eliminates the need for time-consuming and complex gathering of information on income. There will be no administration of clerical cases which have to be dealt with in GB, and the introduction of the conversation with Child Maintenance Choice Service prior to making an application to the statutory service. This conversation will encourage parents to consider their child maintenance options as opposed to defaulting directly to the statutory scheme. The new 2012 scheme was successfully launched in December 2012 and started by accepting applications on an approach known as a Pathfinder approach. By rolling out the reforms in phases, we have been able to identify issues and quickly resolve them almost instantaneously. This ensures that any issues identified do not impact on our customers and, more importantly, ensures the money is flowing to the children. In November 2013, the 2012 scheme was open to all new child maintenance applications. To date, Child Maintenance Service is administering 1,550 cases on the 2012 scheme for Northern Ireland customers. Eventually, the new 2012 scheme will replace the existing 1993 and 2003 schemes and IT systems on which they are administered. The opening of the 2012 scheme to all new child maintenance applications signalled the completion of the first phase of the child maintenance reforms. The second phase of the reforms is scheduled to be introduced in the summer. I will now pass back to Anne to provide some further detail on Phase 2.
Phase 1 of the reforms was the creation of the 2012 scheme. Phase 2 of the reforms will introduce collection and enforcement fees to parents on the 2012 scheme. Phase 2 will also see Child Maintenance Service commence closing cases on existing child maintenance schemes introduced in 1993 and 2003. Now, if I can start just with the collection fees, and again I have to stress that this only applies for those parents who are on collect and pay. The introduction of collection fees is intended to ensure that parents have an incentive to work together to put in place a family-based arrangement for the good of their children. Child Maintenance Service does not want to push parents into a situation where they have to pay fees. The aim is to encourage parents to take financial responsibility and to actively consider collaboration. Obviously, in some cases, that just won't be possible, but generally speaking, we're trying to encourage them to do that. The Minister has already announced the Northern Ireland policy position in relation to fees, and we will be submitting the relevant regulations to the committee shortly. That is that there will be a 20% collection fee for non-resident parents and a 4% collection fee for parents with care. There will also be additional charges for any enforcement action taken. And this is an important point because, unlike GB, the Minister has decided not to introduce the proposed application fee of £20 for Northern Ireland residents. This will ensure, in other words, the fact that we don't have that proposed application fee, this will ensure that the statutory service remains open and accessible to parents who cannot agree their own financial arrangements. I stress again, there will be no collection fee for parents if they make their own family-based arrangement or if they use the direct pay service which is provided by the Child Maintenance Service. Then if we turn to case closure. Over the next 4 years, all existing child maintenance cases on the 1993 and 2003 schemes will be closed. In most cases, parents will be contacted around 6 months in advance of their case being closed, and they will be invited to consider their child maintenance options. Parents will have the option to establish their own family-based arrangements or to apply to the new 2012 scheme. Cases will be closed in an order designed to reduce any disruption to maintenance flowing to children. Our focus is on maximising the flow of money to children and minimising the potential disruption of ongoing payments in enforced payment cases. By 2018, it's envisaged that all statutory scheme customers will be managed under a single set of rules using one IT system. Subordinate legislation is required to enable the full introduction of fees in case closure, and as I've said before, officials will be in touch with the committee soon as part of the SL1 process for both the fees and the case closure regulations, 2 different sets. In conclusion, the reports represent a change from the past. My Minister wants to focus on enhancing the help and support available to separated and separating families, and to focus the resources of the statutory service on those who need it most. It's essential that a range of support mechanisms are developed to suit the needs of the Northern Ireland citizen, and that's what we're striving to achieve through these reforms. The introduction of a conversation with Child Maintenance Choices Service will ensure that parents receive information and support at an early stage. This will enable them to make their own family-based arrangements, hopefully, rather than progressing automatically to the chargeable statutory scheme. For parents, and I think there's hardly a person in this room who doesn't know someone who's in this position, but for parents who cannot make their own arrangements and who require the help of the Statutory Child Maintenance Service, they will benefit too from a more efficient and a fairer child maintenance system, because we envisage that our caseload will be smaller. We'll be able to focus our efforts on enforcement where necessary. Just end by thanking you for the opportunity to brief you on the progress of these reforms, and we're happy to take any questions.
Okay, Anne, thank you, and Bernie. Sammy?
Yeah. Can I say that, first of all, if there's been one failure of policy over the last number of years, I really do think it has been the CSA, and I'm sure many of us, or maybe we just hear all the bad cases. But can I just ask a couple of questions, Anne, on the way forward in this? The first one is just on the case closure, because, and I don't know if you've got the figures to hand, but it'd be very interesting to know the number, first of all, the amount of cases at present where there is debt because payments haven't been completed, and what the full value of that would be. If you have those figures, it'd be useful. And the second thing is this, that given that there's been a failure in many cases to collect money, and sometimes over a 5-10 year period, what happens in case closure here? Do you simply just abandon that and say, well, we haven't been able to collect this money, or what mechanisms will be in place to pursue the outstanding debt in cases which are going to close?
Well, I'll hand that to either Bernie or
Sammy, so whenever we start the case closure process, we have about 31,000 cases live at the minute that we will put through the case closure process. They will be closed in an order that means that those cases that are not paying at the minute will be the ones we will target first to close, leaving the ones that are actually paying, where potentially you've had hard-earned gains to actually make enforcement to get them to pay, that they are the last to close, so that we have longer to persuade those people to move over to different schemes and to make family-based arrangements. In terms of arrears-only cases where there is no current liability, we estimate there's about 8,300 of those cases in Northern Ireland where there is arrears only outstanding. That money will not be written off. That money, at this minute in time, we can't collect it. We are still pursuing it. We will continue to still pursue it. So the arrangement is that even under case closure, those will be moved to a holding queue where we will still attempt, where possible, to close those or to collect that money. So there is no decision at this stage that will just be written off and ignored. However, the fact that we can't get the money at the minute means that there are reasons why we can't get it at the minute. We hope that whenever we get more access to the HMRC data under the new systems, that position might change, and if we can collect it, we certainly will.
There's 8,300 where there's arrears at present. Do you know what the value of those arrears is?
I don't have the value. I could look and see if that's something we could dig out for you. These are cases where there's no current liability. They're simply with an arrears outstanding. So they are. So as I say, we will certainly look to see if we can get the value of what those arrears are.
Right. And then on top of that, you'll have cases where there is current liability, but where there are arrears included in that as well. How many does that amount to?
So we believe in the first segment of the cases we will look to close down. There's approximately 6,000 cases, what we call nil assessed. In other words, there's no current liability. The second segment then will be the non-compliant cases, including our clerical equivalents. So there are cases where they're not compliant at the moment, where there is a liability, and we reckon that there's just under 2,000 of those. We then have, we reckon, somewhere between 10,000 that there is the maintenance is flowing, and there's a further 3,500-4,000 where the maintenance is flowing but through enforcement. So that's why we will look to close the cases in an order that means the cases that aren't compliant at the minute and there's no liability, we will close those first, and then we will get down to the ones where there is actually an enforcement order at the minute. So we'll say we've about 3,500 of those.
Okay. I I agree that if voluntary arrangements can be made, it's much better. Indeed, I can think of lots of cases where I had where there was voluntary arrangements in place, and then child support agency came in and said, no, that's not good enough, and that's when it all went pear-shaped. But what mechanisms are you putting in place to ensure that the kind of fee asking, because I mean, 8,300 cases, you're talking over a quarter of cases currently where you have not succeeded in collecting the money that was owed. How will the new system, because in the new system you're only taking on the hard cases, you're not taking on the easy cases, because the easy cases will be done voluntarily. How will the new system ensure that where payments are assessed and where there's a reluctance, because the people didn't come to arrangement in the first place, that there'll be better processes in place to make sure the money's collected?
So those 8,000 cases we talked about have built up obviously from the very introduction of child support back in 1993. So they have, and they may all have at various stages in their journey paid at some stage. There's no current liability on them, and there's a certain amount of debt on them now. In terms of going forward into the new system, what we have is there will be up-to-date information from HMRC, which will be immediately helpful in helping us to actually get assessment orders out and get notices out fairly quickly, rather than have disputes about what people's earnings may or may not be. That will certainly give us the opportunity. Also, what we'll have through the direct pay service is that you touched on where people say they'll pay and then it breaks down. Because there's no charge for the application fee, which is unique, which our Minister has introduced to Northern Ireland, that if there is a reluctance to agree a family-based arrangement, but one of the parties is not so sure, they can make the application, we will make the assessment, we will tell both parties what they need to pay. They can then use the direct pay service, so there's no charge at any stage. And if the direct pay then does not work, if the voluntary agreement between the two parties breaks down at any stage, the receiving parent can come straight back to the service, and we can immediately then impose a deduction from earnings order or an order that's necessary to enforce that, and immediately put whatever arrears are necessary onto that system. So it means that there's not having to wait for several months for it to go through a reassessment process. So we can give some sort of assurance for those parents who are maybe a wee bit reluctant in the early stages of their application process, that they might be concerned about a family-based arrangement breaking down. The fact there is no charge to come and get your assessment done by us, have the exact monies agreed, what needs to be paid, and then they make that agreement. We keep that case open as a direct pay. It means that the receiving parent can come back to us at any stage if there's a failure that you mentioned to earlier.
And you make that all sound very, very seamless, but first of all, just having access to HMRC is not likely to be the panacea either. If people are self-employed, for example, or if they're frequently changing jobs, as sometimes happens, either because it's deliberate to try and avoid follow-up, or just because of the nature of their employment. I mean, can you put any processes in place to avoid or to stop people avoiding payments in that particular way? And the other thing then is just on the immediate enforcement of judgments thing. I mean, legally, I don't know how quickly that can be done, what you have to prove before that can be given by the court. But it seems to me that all that you're saying are the improvements that are in place are open to you at the moment, and yet it's not working. So in the difficult cases.
So you're quite right. If somebody at the end of the day wants to avoid this, it is very difficult. If somebody, we have evidence in the past where people, when we put deduction from earning orders on and find out they've got a job, will leave that job straight away. We have, at this moment in time, the opportunity to use the latest data now from HMRC. So even if it's 2 or 3 years out of date, we can still actually use whatever the latest employment. So even if they're self-employed and their records not up to date, we will simply pull down the latest and use and do comparative figures based on what the latest data is. So if somebody wants to avoid paying and goes to remarkable lengths to avoid that, it is a challenge, and the new system will not be a panacea, as you say, to avoid people who are really unscrupulous. Not what I can tell you is that our figures in Northern Ireland compared to what our colleagues in GB are doing are significantly better. We are much significantly better about getting people to pay whenever they have an outstanding balance. We already have a very successful deductions team who will actually go and pursue bank accounts and put deduction orders on bank accounts where we can. We also do have a number of cases we do take through enforcement of judgments. Indeed, we have forthcoming meetings lined up in discussions with them about how our new system will actually work through with them. So, you know, there is no, you're quite right, there's no panacea. If people are determined to avoid their liability, and we have evidence of people going to remarkable lengths to do that, it will be difficult, but we will continue to pursue them to pay the liabilities that they are assessed at having to pay.
Though, I mean, all I can say, David, is that the current system is not very good at that, because I can think of where you've allowed debts of tens of thousands to build up on occasions without being able to even get enforcement of earnings situation. Can
I maybe just add to what David has said? The changes that came into the Child Maintenance Support Act in 2008 are only becoming operational now as we move into phase 2. That gave us enhanced enforcement powers in order to escalate the enforcement process. So the changes that were made here in Northern Ireland are only now becoming available to us in an operational capacity as we move into phase 2 of the programme. So we've been working in the Pathfinder process, ensuring that the system is working, ensuring that we have this interface with HMRC, and it is proving very worthwhile. And we are the case closure process has been set out. It is a scheme that has been set out, and we are actually ahead of the game. And our Northern Ireland Child Maintenance Service has been proactively preparing cases for the case closure process, and we have already touched, if you like, in terms of housekeeping terms, over 5,000 cases at the moment to establish how this case closure process is going to work. And what we're finding is that many of the people on our books don't actually want to be there because they were enforced there in the past, but we're having these conversations with them as a housekeeping exercise, and many of them are actually quite happy to move to family-based arrangements. However, you're quite right in saying that there are that quota that we will need to be proactive in managing, and we believe that just on the piloting that we've been doing to date, and I think David will confirm this, that we believe that the enhanced enforcement powers that were brought in and the new changes that are brought into the Northern Ireland Child Maintenance Service will actually make it a more effective service for the Northern Ireland customer. That's what our early indications are showing.
I hope it does. Just one last question. This extortion 24% collection, plus if you happen to get into an enforcement action, then there's additional charges. Now, I know as you say, but we know £20 application fee, but I mean 24% is a fairly hefty charge. Will that kick in every case where somebody says, or where because there's been a breakdown, somebody then becomes included in the scheme? There's a 24% charge. So, if say the maintenance is £100 a month, does the parent who's paying then pay you an additional £20 per month, or is it taken out of that £100, and the person who's receiving it lose 4% of it, so they get £96 instead? Is that in every case? And how do you justify that kind of level of charge?
The first thing about it is, as I said at the outset, is that the reason for having the charges is to act as an incentive. These cases are this is meant to be the backstop. I think that's the word that we've used earlier on. Backstop. There are those who can use the child maintenance service and do direct pay, which is where child maintenance, as we've said, work out how much the maintenance should be and then leave the parents just to actually pay it directly themselves. So this is only for those difficult cases where that doesn't happen. It's there to encourage. It's an expensive service to provide, and this is in recognition of that. The 24% is 20%, as you say, paid by the non-resident parent and 4% paid by the receiving parent. There are certain exceptions to that, one of which is where there is domestic violence. So there are some exceptions to it, but generally speaking, they will have to pay, yes.
If I could just add to that from the service perspective, one of the key issues in changing our title was to change the whole ethos of our organisation to providing a service. And our role is changing to be more encouraging people to understand that the last possible option is the collect and pay service. What we can provide for parents is the direct pay service, where we will enable people to understand what they perhaps, if they want guidance on what they should be paying, help them with their calculations, and we can help set up the direct pay service, which enables the money at their discretion to flow freely from one parent to the other, and there's absolutely no charge for that. So this is the absolute last resort, and we are enhancing the information and support role that we provide in educating people to the options that are available and to encourage them to avoid going to that last resort of the collect and pay service. So our objective would be to have minimum numbers in that rather than encourage people straight into the scheme. Our target is to keep people out of the scheme and to encourage them to make their own collaborative arrangements and family-based arrangements. And we do have the support facility there to help them set up the direct pay, which is absolutely free of charge. And we will be talking every client through the options before they would actually enter into the collect and pay scheme.
Okay, Mickey Brady.
Yeah, thanks very much for the presentation. Just one of the things that Sammy had mentioned about the amounts, we were told in the last mandate that the outstanding amount and child support, child maintenance was subsumed into DSD was something like £61 million. That was back in 2008, 2009. That was an approximate figure, I presume. Just a couple of questions, and it's something that had been raised before. I represent the Border constituency, so there's jurisdictional issues. There's people who don't want to pay can just leave to Dundalk or wherever. And I'm just wondering, has there been anything done to update the cross-border cooperation in that sense? Because I know I was told before that that was something that was envisaged and that would improve because there was jurisdictional issues. Certainly, and probably the same applies in most border constituencies. I'm just wondering on that. The other question I had was, when all this is implemented fully by 2018, do you anticipate job losses within your own operation?
Reciprocal arrangements have been put in place that we will deal with. And that's both north, south, east, west and European. So yes, reciprocal arrangements are in place. With regard to your question on the arrears figure, in the process of preparing for case closure, we're assessing the arrears figure and how much of that may be deemed collectible. Because in some cases, people have passed away, people don't have the money to pay and never will have the capability to pay and all sorts of that. So that is part of our case closure process. We should be able to come back to a later stage with further information on that if you wish. And the third point about, as I mentioned earlier, with regard to the jobs, we are changing the role. At this point in time, I can't predict how many individuals will be using our service, and indeed you will be aware in the legislation there's provision for a 30-month review of the policy intent to see if it's actually working. So the role that we are having is moving away from spending a lot of time on processing and trying to collect data to educating people and encouraging people to set up the family-based arrangement. We just we will make every effort to make that work, but the full evaluation will be 30 months in. One thing I can say in relation to the child maintenance case is that the exemplar improvements in performance in the staff within my division has secured significant number of jobs to the Northern Ireland economy, and for the next financial year the budget that we have secured for those jobs is in the region of £27 to £29 million. For the longer term, we'll just have to see how the evaluation goes, but certainly we're in a growth period at the moment within Child Maintenance Division, and we would intend to encourage the exceptional performance to continue in order to try and secure further work for Northern Ireland.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michael Copeland.
Thanks, Chair. Again, I have three real questions and then one that is just a curiosity. No matter what way you cut this, an amount of money needs to be established that's paid by the non-resident parent to the parent with care. And the biggest issues arise around that amount of money assessed, in my experience. And there are some anomalies. I remember speaking to you before about directors' drawings as opposed to income. So you have an individual who can be a director of a company, draw as salary minimum wage, and 55 or 60,000 as director's drawings that actually don't count as income. Has that been addressed in any way at this stage? The second one is something I believe called best evidence, where the parents may have got together and the non-resident parent may have contributed financially to his, usually, children's upbringing, and then CSA may become involved, and all of a sudden a battle cry goes up, I never got a cent, despite the fact that evidence in the form of invoices and people witnessing paying money, and usually there's a reticence on behalf of the parent with care to accept anything other than cash. So has that been addressed? And the other point is counted income, or what's counted as income. In other words, where the non-resident parent has a partner, their income is apparently counted partially towards his income and the assessment that's made. And I'm using his and her pejoratively. But the parent with care can actually re-establish another relationship, and yet the non-resident parent's liability remains the same. That's my understanding of it. Is it the case? If so, will it continue? Those are the three easy ones. The last one is notional.
The last one about the income of partner.
No, I have another one.
You've got another one? Do you want to ask it now as well?
Yeah, well, it's just curious. Is parenthood rooted solely in biology? In other words, to be classed as a parent, do you necessarily have to be the biological father of the child? It's with the impending equal marriage possibilities where there could be a situation where a child has been adopted by a same-sex couple, and financial responsibilities for bringing that child up remain the same. But if they separate, can parenthood be denied on the basis of non-biological, or the biological impossibility?
Okay, well, I'll take that. I'll personally take that last one in the sense that I'll be quite frank with you. I couldn't hesitate. I couldn't start to try and answer that just at the minute. I would have to go back and check. My first thought, and it's only a thought, is that I would have assumed that if there was an adoption and there was some formal process, that would be covered. I would have assumed so, but I certainly would hesitate to sign my name and blood to that, and I would prefer to go back and check. But anyway, then if I take the director's drawings point, I mean, legally, a company director can't take money out of a company without accounting for it in some way to HMRC. And HMRC is now a source of information for the assessment of child maintenance liability. They are legally required to show what monies they've taken which are accountable in the maintenance or by way of the variations process within the child maintenance system. So a director's income can include remuneration, share dividends, debentures, drawings from the company, covers them. So that's the first point. The other points I will leave to my colleagues.
Best evidence. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah,
or do you want me to?
Best evidence. So I think what you described wasn't what we would term, we talk about best evidence whenever we're trying to do an assessment on a case, and we need to have the best evidence that's available to us, and if there's nothing else other than what's in front of us, then that is the best evidence. What you describe, however, is what we're moving away from in the new family-based arrangements. So in the past, where people made arrangements to maybe take the children on holidays, buy school uniforms, those sort of arrangements in the past, what we were interested in the old system was a financial contribution. So it was in the 2012, the new legislation, that's why it's a family-based arrangement. A family-based arrangement can be whatever the two parties agree as a family-based arrangement. We won't necessarily get involved in that. So if they agree, sorry, go ahead, I'll let you explain.
What I'm really driving at is where a non-resident parent has demonstrable proof that an amount, let's say £4,000 or £5,000 or £6,000 was paid over a period of years by virtue of invoices that were received, and that when asked, the parent with care said, "I never got a penny." And apparently the production, in order to verify the fact that this money took place, it requires the parent with care to say, "Yes, I got it," despite the fact that they previously said, "No, they didn't." And it's just, apparently you guys then write out to the parent with care asking for verification, and if they don't reply, the presumption is that they didn't get it.
And so that is part of the old system.
But what will happen to people who have accrued liabilities under the old system when you go to the new system, because that will still be hanging over their heads?
So as part of our case closure, whatever your liability that has been assessed and worked out, you will still have that liability. So you will. So you have obviously your right of appeal and challenge to that under the old system, as they currently have. But the new system won't write off any of your old arrears. So whatever
arrears in these cases.
Yes, whatever your arrears are, when we come to case closure, you will have a responsibility. Those will have to be addressed still. So they will, and if necessary, they will be brought across to the new system if that's what's needed. Clearly, but under the 2012 scheme, what we're talking about is that those sort of family-based arrangements, we will not get involved in them. If that is what the parties want, we will be quite happy to accept that.
But I come back to the same question: how do you judge when the non-resident parent, produces evidence as best they can that money was paid, and the parent with care says it wasn't?
But under the 2012 system, we will not be, once a date of claim is made, it will only go back, and we can tell you exactly how far we'll go back to that, but we will not be going back years and years where there may have been a family, if whatever the arrangement was in place then, that is deemed to have been their choice to have had in place. They can't come to us 2-3 years down the line and say, well, I didn't get any of this and I want to make it back to the claim for 2 or 3 years.
I'm thinking more of the person who has actually been assessed with arrears under the current system.
That liability will still remain, so they must address that under the old system, and there is appeal rights built into that. So the old system rules are not changing. Whatever the assessment and the liability that's ultimately placed there, that liability, once they exhaust their appeal rights, that liability will remain. And if there are arrears to come forward, then they'll come forward just as they would normally have.
I think the key to answer your question is the appeal. There's an appeal option there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And the last one was the income of new partners of resident, non-resident parents and parents with care.
How do we take that into account?
Yeah, in other words, if a non-resident parent has a liability to the parent with care, and the parent with care suddenly remarries and marries someone with a massive income, apparently that does not impact on that liability.
Our assessment will be on the information we get from HMRC. And the information that they have declared as the gross earnings, that's where our assessment will be based upon.
But if the non-resident parent gets a new family, his partner or her partner's income is counted partially as his income.
You're saying, yeah, I see the point you're making.
The joint income?
Yes, it's to do with. Yes, I think the point you're making is that in assessing what somebody should be paying in maintenance, we take account of the paying parents' joint income, but we don't take account of the receiving parents' potential other partner.
The reason
That's the
for
point
that?
you're making. Is there a reason for that?
I'm not sure. I'd need to take that away, to be honest.
Does
I'd need to
seem-
just
it does
clarify.
seem
Can we look at that and get back to you on that?
My understanding it's the gross salary of the parent, but I'll come back. I honestly don't know the detail. I'll check
I mean,
and
to
come
an
back.
extent, it's about the children, and I would imagine that the law would not expect a new partner of the receiving parent to be paying for their partner's children. I would imagine it's something to do with that, whereas I can see the look on your face.
I honestly don't know. I'll
We'll
check
look
and
at
come
it.
back to you.
I've asked you questions.
Find out.
Find out for you.
So you'll come back with that information,
Yes,
anyway?
I
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Yeah, so I extracted most of the information I was looking for, but I wanted to come back to this issue of the 8,300 arrears cases. You told us that some of those date from 1993. Is that correct?
They would date from when the scheme was first introduced, so there'll be a variety of them right from that very first scheme.
So 20 years on, presumably in that 20-year period, there have been some effort to recoup.
Oh, absolutely. Only yes. So, back in the history of the CSA, what happened was if people were non-compliant, they didn't respond to even correspondence, there was an interim maintenance assessment put on them. In other words, there was an assessment made and sent out to them, and therefore, we could put £200 on somebody, and that would build up for years and years and years. Now, when we eventually catch up with that person, and then they produce evidence that they were on benefits that we didn't know about, or they actually had got back together with they'd reconciled, we can then write that off, so we can. So, but we don't know until we have the evidence. But those older cases are starting to become obviously less and less now, so they are.
But I suppose the point I was making was that if in the CSA days they were unsuccessful in recouping arrears, why should we think that you'll be any more successful?
Yes,
Go ahead. You go first.
Sir, and that's the point I made to Sammy, that we're not saying that the new 2012, the new Child Maintenance Reform Programme is going to allow us to track down anybody who will not pay their arrears. There will still be hardcore people that we will struggle to get arrears from. It's not to say we won't pursue them. Just to give you some assurance around the figures, whilst the 8,000 seems heavy, that's 26% of our caseload. The corresponding figures in GB are 36%. So we are much, much more successful in Northern Ireland at collecting arrears for a liability than our colleagues in GB.
Well, of course, there's 6,000 of your cases which are just nil assessments.
There are, and they will be the first cases we
So
look
it's
at.
really about a third of the actual supposedly paying people.
Yes.
Yeah. I was just going to say part of the case closure process requires us to look at every single case from 1993 and revisit it. And we don't have the authority to just write off the arrears. We are required to make an effort to try and recoup money.
But did the CSA write off arrears?
No, it's the same process.
So arrears have never officially been written off?
Yeah, we have powers moving forward in agreement with DFP in individual cases where it's deemed not possible, where people have passed away or their nominal amounts of less than £5, I think is the amount, that we can close the case with the agreement of the individuals involved. But it's only cases where it's disproportionate costs or there's real significant evidence that we cannot make an effort to recover the costs.
And will the 20% collection fee apply to arrears?
The 20. I'm sorry, I'm not clear. Where does the money go? Is that?
No. The 20. You're going to have a 20% collection fee.
Does that become? Yeah.
Will that apply to the arrears figure as well?
It will only apply to the arrears
On
of
the new
2012 on the new scheme. So,
scheme.
any arrears from the old scheme will not be touched by the.
And where does the 20% come from? Why 20%?
It came from Westminster. There had been consultations.
Following that.
A lot of the arrears, just some of those arrears could be what we call sector state arrears.
Yes.
So they could, as opposed to arrears owed to actually parents. So they could be just arrears that, again, whenever the old systems were introduced, you had to, if a parent with care made a claim to benefits, they had to automatically make a claim to the Child Support Agency. We had to therefore put some sort of interim maintenance assessment if we couldn't track down the non-resident parent, and therefore there were arrears assumed that would have been owed to the benefit system, that person, the parent with care, wouldn't have got so much benefits if they'd been getting the maintenance due. So a lot of the arrears will be what we call separate estate debt, as opposed to parent.
And when will we see how successful or otherwise you're being in terms of...
In terms of
30-month review.
In terms of the debt figure that Mickey touched on, obviously we don't have the exact figure for the 8,000, what their debt, our overall debt balance is coming down. So, the debt balance in 11-12, we reduced it last year, not the year it's just finished, the year before, by £1.5 million. It's now down to just over £80 million. So it is, so the debt figure is actually now starting to come down. It's the first time we've been able to bring it down. We expect this year significantly to reduce it further, so we do. So there is evidence that we are now starting to get at those cases, and we are starting to reduce the debt arrears.
As I could just build on what David has said there, in the analysis that we're doing in this preparation for case closure, of that 80 million that David has referred to, it is deemed that approximately only 1/3 of that is collectible in terms of flowing to the families or flowing to the children. In looking at the cases as there where people have passed on or people don't have the money to pay. So it is very proactively being looked at. And if I could reassure members and Chair that this is a complete transformation. It is a radical reform of how the child maintenance service works. And it is addressing many of the issues that have been the legacy of the history of the former Child Support Agency, which is effectively closing down now. And I'm not convinced. But we are really, really trying to... if I could give you an example of Northern Ireland terms alone, in last year we collected £24 million. Insured £24 million flowed to children. This year we've increased that in the current climate of an economic recession to over 26 million. We haven't got our final end-year figure in yet. So that's £2 million more in the current economic climate that's flowing to children, and that supports approximately 22,000 children in Northern Ireland. And that's just by, frankly, a new management team, a very strong, committed management team, and absolute uplift of performance in the staff and the organisation.
Okay, finally, if you succeed in recovering some old arrears from the 90s, etc., where does that money actually go?
It depends who it's due to. So if it's due to a parent with care, it will go to the parent with care.
Even though the children are long since?
Absolutely.
Yes, we've had some recent significant amounts that have been
and they go to the, let's say, the mother rather than the
parent with
now
care.
Adult children?
The parent with care could be the mother, a grandparent, a guardian. Did you see that?
Yeah. So whether, in that scenario, the children are no longer children, but the beneficiary is simply the parent?
That could be debated
now. That's who you pay it
That's
to?
who we pay it to, yes.
Still pay it. So even if the children go beyond their qualifying age, if there's a liability from whenever they were entitled to receive it, we will pursue that still. So we will, and if we recover it, we'll go directly to whoever the parent with care is.
David, are you sure that's the... Can I just... Because it's just on that particular specific question Jim asked. The fear is there's some fancy footwork going to go on here to try and reduce the arrears with the handover and rundown. I'm getting some evidence. I can't actually give you it in black and white, but I'm getting some evidence where some parents are being told, well, look, sure, your son's 22 now or whatever, they're outside the qualifying period. It's unlikely we're going to be able to recover this money. And is that attitude going or is that going to be one of the ways in which you'll get the arrears down by simply saying, well, look, the child's outside the qualifying age, difficult to get this debt. This is one of the kind of criteria we're going to use for writing debt off.
There certainly won't be any playing with fancy footwork. So certainly, if there's a debt owed, and a parent with care wants us to pursue that, we will pursue that. So we will absolutely no doubt about that. But a lot of the debt, when we contact it, and some of the work we're doing with our case closures, some of this debt is actually, it has been accrued, and if I can use the term, it might not be real debt, and therefore there could have been a reconciliation, but because they had been forced to come to the Child Support Agency years ago under the benefit system, they didn't want to tell us that they'd reconciled or whatever. So whenever we contact them and say, look, you're still owed £500, £3,000, and they will immediately say, oh, I'm happy for you to write it off, I don't want you to collect it. So in those cases where they tell us that, we will absolutely write it off and assume that that is therefore okay. But where a parent with care says, I have a debt outstanding and I want you to pursue it, there is absolutely we will continue to pursue that.
But that's probably been one of the surprising things in this pilot, that some people have said, I'm happy, I've moved on, everything's all right, don't follow it up. I mean, that is one of the interesting emerging findings.
Well, Brian Gregory, and now just following on, Matter, you can see in terms of the figure of 8,000, as we move on, will there be mechanisms in place to make sure that there's never an accumulation of any significant amount of arrears? So there must be like sort of milestones or triggers which actually says if you see a problem emerging, it's actually dealt with much quicker, so that you never have an arrear.
That's the enhanced enforcement powers that were brought in the Child Maintenance Support Act.
Okay, thanks, Bernie. Gregory.
Yeah, just apology for missing the first part of the presentation, but it was just a query struck me upon a response that David had given to an answer, I think it was to Sammy. The business of your relative success compared to GB, for example, is that relatively significantly better or just better?
It's significantly better. So this year, we have a figure, we have a phrase called maintenance outcomes, as the percentage of our caseload that is actually contributing. We will close, we estimate this year, this last financial year, about 90%. GB are estimating to close at 85%. We will meet our ministerial target and accuracy by about, the target's 97%, we think we'll close at 98.5%. GB will not meet their 97% target. In terms of the number of arrears outstanding, of the balance of the cases, ours is 26%, GB's is 36%. So we are significantly outperforming. Over the last number of years, we have significantly changed around the organisation, and there's absolutely no doubt that the Northern Ireland customer is getting a better service from the Northern Ireland Child Maintenance Service now than they ever have, and indeed we are now, for the first time in many, many years, outperforming our DWP colleagues.
Yeah. Well, given that it is significantly better, then would it be safe to assume that your colleagues in GB, under best practice, are over here to see how they can do it better?
Yeah.
As Bernie mentioned earlier, we are actually their colleagues also in GB, so we also provide a service as one of 6 regions across GB. So we have staff in Northern Ireland who are working for Northern Ireland Child Maintenance Service, Northern Ireland customers. We also have up to 900 staff now funded and working for DWP on their GB caseload. So there is absolutely a very good best sharing of practice between both jurisdictions, so there is.
In fact, we've presented twice on our pilot on case closure, and they are very interested in our evaluation that we're about to do on our pilot exercise, and they're interested because of our emerging findings and to learn from our best practice. So, yeah, we're working very closely with them.
Okay.
Proud to lead the way.
Okay, there's no other members indicating to speak then. Could I thank yourself, Anne, Bernie and David, for your presentation and your questions from members. Good morning, and good luck with the process, and we look forward to the evaluation as we move on. Thank you very much. Okay, members, we move on to the next item, which is proposed subordinate legislation, item number 7. This is an SL1, Business Improvement Districts. You have the material on page 25 of your pack. Is aware the Department proposes making a series of regulations that will support the establishment of BIDs. I'm presuming members have read this. Are members content that the rule be made? Moving on to the next item, then, which is the SL1, the Social Security Invalid Care Allowance Amendment Regulation on Ireland 2014. Information for this is on page 65 of your tabled items. And the Department proposed to make a statutory rule under powers conferred by the Social Security Contributions and Benefits 1992 Act. Members content for the rule to be made? Thank you, Brady.
No, I just wanted to make a point, Chair. Carers Allowance is minimal, really. there's no sliding scale. This is up the earnings factor by £2. If a carer at the moment earns a penny over £100, they lose all their benefit. It's supposed to be a substitute for wages. This is what we've been told. When it was originally introduced, I think it started off at about £12. But it's just, if you consider a carer gets about £60 a week, roughly, and has a minimum of 35 hours care, it works out roughly about a quarter of the minimum wage. Carers save the department, the government here, £4 billion a year. So I just wanted to make that point, because to put it up by £2 is probably the minimal amount that could have been done. And it seems that a sliding scale where people could earn slightly more and lose some of their benefit. But I suppose the fundamental argument in all of this is that carers allowance should be a standalone benefit, because it's linked to attendance allowance and disability living allowance, which at this point in time are standalone benefits, and no effort has been made to redress this imbalance.
Okay.
Just wanted to put that on record.
Okay, Mickey, that's fine. Thank you for that. Then moving on then to the next item, which is the statutory rules, and item number 9. It's SR 102 2014 maternity allowance, wife or partner of self-employed earner, regulations NI 2014. Information on page 15 of your tabled items pack. The committee considered the SL1 relevant to this legislation on the 27th of February 2014, and the committee was content that it would be made. On that basis, if members remain content, then if I could read the motion and the record, the rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure before the Assembly. Okay, members content, and I read the record that the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 102/2014, Social Security Maternity Allowance, Participating Wife of Civil Partner of Self-Employed Earner, Regulations, Northern Ireland 2014, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report. Has no objection to the rule. All agreed? Okay, thank you. Next item is SR 103/2014. This is to secure tenancies notice regulations, and that's paperwork is on page 64 of your pack. The committee considered this SL1 on the 9th of January 2014, and the committee was content for the rule to be made. Again, this rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure in the Assembly. If the committee has no objections, then, if they're content, then I read in the record. Are members content with that? Okay. So that the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 103/2014, the Secure Tenancies Notice Regulations Northern Ireland 2014, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. All agreed? Thank you very much. Next item then, 11 SR 101/2014. This is a registered rents increase order. Paper work is on page 71 of your tabled items. This was considered by the committee as an SL1 on the 20th of March 2014. And the rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure. If members are content, then I'll read this in the record. Okay. That the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 101/2014, the Registered Rents Increase Order Northern Ireland 2014, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Agreed? Thank you. Next item 12, SR 105/2014. Paperwork is on page 77 of your tabled items. This SL1 was considered at the meeting on the 20th of March 2014. Again, the rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure. If members are content, then I'll read into the record. Okay. That the Committee for Social Development has considered the statutory rule SR 105/2014, the Social Security Miscellaneous Amendments Regulations Northern Ireland 2014, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. All agreed? Thank you for that, members. Item 13, correspondence. Just to draw attention to page 45 of your tabled items. Department have written to the Committee in respect of Financial Support Services, and they wish to note that briefing this has been scheduled for May in the forward work programme. Okay. And members content to accept the correspondence as per the memo, to note the correspondence per the memo, on page 76 of your pack. Members content that, and we move on then to the forward work programme. The forward work programme is on page 88 of your pack. Members content with the forward work programme as drafted. Okay, thanking you.
On the forward work programme, Chairman, see, we're penciling in 8th and 15th of May for evidence sessions under phase 2. Do we think that will be wrapped up in the 2 weeks?
Well, we want to come on to the committee inquiry as a separate item at the end of this. So,
That's all right.
are you happy enough then? Okay. Well, item 15, any other business members who want to raise anything under AOB? No. Then I'll leave the adjourn item to...
Chairman, can I just ask, you see, in relation, and I know that we've got a work that needs to get through, but the 22nd of May and the 15th of May, how realistic is it that, given we're going to have elections, that we're going to get a quorum in those two? I mean, one will be the week before the election, one will be the tail of the election.
It might have been before you came in, Sam, I'm not just quite sure, but at the start of the meeting, we looked at, I made the point that, it's my understanding that the business committee is looking at the schedule for that week for the plenary, and there's a view that there may well be a later agenda for the plenary. Clearly, in terms of the 22nd of May meeting, at least this one anyway, we had considered this briefly at the, if you remember, the Way Day there a week or two ago, and members were concerned that there may not be a quorum and there may be difficulties, people may want to be away working on the election or whatever. So we did raise it very briefly amongst ourselves at the Away Day, and I was suggesting this morning that on the likelihood that members may not be, well, may have to go off and do some work in the election, at least on the meeting of the 22nd, that we could potentially reschedule to earlier in the week given the late plenary sessions, which are likely to be, but it's not confirmed yet. So can we address it? So we more or less had agreed early on, and then we would wait and deal with that there, but we're very conscious of that. We didn't deal with the 15th of May meeting now, so we only dealt with the meeting on the 22nd.
Just to hear me, you're likely to find people tied up with...
We'll probably have to look at the agenda at the very, very least. So we're going to go back to, certainly we've already agreed to go back to the meeting schedule for the 22nd with a view to maybe rescheduling that to earlier in the week if that's possible. Okay. I wanted now to close the session. Then we agreed early on we would just close the session and to deal with the inquiry item in closed session. The members can we do that. Can we just adjourn for 2 minutes? I just want to go for a comfort break, so a couple of minutes.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.